That was Ed Sheeran with Afterglow, and coming up next, Richard Marks with the classic Hazard. And speaking of hazards, John McDonnell, our Canberra correspondent for FlowNews24, has flagged that there could be a hazard in the form of a Labor government attracted to the Biden administration's latest tax and spend policies. Debate is playing out about Australia's economic recovery after the pandemic, and certainly one of the first things that needed to be locked in place to get us away from debt and deficit, and we've had during the pandemic, has been to actually control the spread of COVID-19 and have us progressing towards a point where we're not going to have continuous lockdowns. And the announcement by the Prime Minister last night that the AstraZeneca vaccine would be restricted when it came to the use by people under the age of 50 might have slowed the estimations, and I've been warning for some time that we would fail to reach the target of getting to the end of October where everyone in Australia would have received their first jab. But the talk in America under the Biden administration, as John McDonnell points out, is that the federal government is going to spend an eye-watering amount of money to try and get the American economy going again. They're proposing to spend $1.9 trillion on COVID recession relief payments, John reports, and an additional $2 trillion over the next 10 years in what has been called the Green New Deal. Now, this would be spending on infrastructure, green energy, healthcare, and communications, particularly delivering internet via fibre to the home. One of the key means by which Mr. Biden proposes to pay for all of this is to lift American company taxes. Now, I was involved in federal politics during the Trump administration, and it was a race to try and lower our company taxes in Australia to keep up with the Trump administration's moves to lower their corporate tax rates. But as John reports, what Mr. Biden is proposing is to send America right back up to having the highest corporate tax rates in the developed world. That's not going to go down well with business, of course, but he claims that it's also going to restrict American innovation, potentially hamper the pace and size of the recovery from the pandemic by the American economy. What John's pointing out in this article entitled "Will Labor Adopt Biden's Progressive Agenda?" is there's going to be a sore temptation on the part of the Albanese-led Labor government that they would go back to what are in effect, John claims, the Bill Shorten-era tax and spend policies of the Labor Party to achieve economic recovery. Now, I know when the pandemic started, I was telling people about the Andrews government who were saying, well, this is going to be a real problem for Daniel Andrews with this first range of lockdowns that they were having at the time. But I said, no, I think Mr. Andrews is not only going to be popular off the back of these lockdowns, but he's also going to be relishing the chance to tax and spend his way into an economic recovery for Victoria, because he will have permission to do what, as a very left-leaning Labor leader would want to do, is have the government in charge of controlling who gets a lift up out of the economic recession. So I think that is the sore temptation that parties across politics are going to have, particularly of the Labor persuasion, is to use the pandemic and the economic recovery as justification for some incredible tax and spend policies, some massive government spending programs which can often be quite wasteful and ineffective, but also a burgeoning amount of public debt. Australia's chucked out its debt ceiling. We've gone way over the limits that had been set in the past. And then are we, in effect, the current generation, stealing from our children and our grandchildren and future generations by leaving the bill at their feet to pay through the tax system when you've got a debt ceiling that has gone up past $1.1 trillion and our gross debt is expected to go up to $1.5 trillion almost by the middle of this decade? That's a huge bill that our children and grandchildren are ultimately going to have to pay.